Every single profession, every single white collar profession has an element of sales. We spend a huge portion of our time persuading, convincing, cajoling other people. It's built into what we do.
Dan Pink is the best-selling author of multiple books on how to apply science and psychology to the art of business. In this episode of Real Relationships, Real Revenue, we dive into how to overcome the business development resistance and all kinds of resistance in the work you face.
When I say that every day is a struggle in writing a book, I don't think that's an exaggeration.
The secrets of business development success and cultivating winning strategies for growth.
It turned out that the super extroverted people, the backslapping, glad-handing types, they were also terrible because they talked too much, listened too little, they were too aggressive, they were actually too concerned about being liked rather than telling the prospect, hey, that might not work.
And how to create momentum in your business development career.
Can I do everything? And the answer is no. You can't change everything, you can't do everything. That's life. But I think it's the wrong question. I think the real question we should be asking ourselves is, what is one small thing I can do today to make things a little bit better?
Drop us into a moment where it was sort of hard and you were struggling and you worked out of that. And then after they get to know you, then we'll talk about those 3 pieces of content that we've been chatting about.
I'll be very forthright with you. I had one book that I was working on where the manuscript was due on Labor Day, and around July 4th, I had a panic attack first and only time I've had a panic attack where I just became shaky and unable to function because I was pretty certain I wasn't going to finish the book, that I wasn't going to be able to do it, that I didn't know how to do it. And so what I did is I took a break, and my wife, she drove me to somewhere. I remember it was I don't even remember the name of it, but someplace like maybe 30 miles from here. We've got an outdoor shopping center where we walked on. Our kids were little at the time, walked around, got some ice cream, got a good night's sleep. And then the next day got back to try to do one thing, and I was fine thereafter. But that was a scary moment because having never had that before, never having had it since, it's like being possessed.
Our whole season this year is on business development habits. So you doing little things all the time to make progress. Was it sort of habits, that little things in the beginning that sort of got you out of that?
I think it was one of those things, an emotional cascade that sometimes takes over us sometimes, where something goes wrong and something else goes wrong and something else goes wrong. You look at the future, you don't think you can do it. And then the whole thing it's the perverse snowball, not your positive snowball. But I do think that the way out of it, to your point, the way out of that, and just as a generally good hygienic move, is to get stuff done. Even if it's not huge stuff, just get stuff done. Writing 1 paragraph is better than writing 0 paragraphs. And so just try to make progress every day.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then I love starting off with something like that because it shows that you're real. Like, it would be easy for somebody that's never seen you on video, that has read some of your books, to feel like they can't learn from you. And that it's exact opposite. Everybody's struggling with different things.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I'd say writing a book is extremely hard. It's at least extremely hard for me. I think it's extremely hard for most people who want to do it well. And when I say that every day is a struggle in writing a book, I don't think that's an exaggeration. I don't want to match it to people with legitimate struggles of not having enough to eat, not having a roof over their head, fighting off horrible illnesses. But every day I gear up I don't know if your readers are familiar with the work of Steven Pressfield and the War of Art. And he has this idea of the resistance is always out there. And I have on my desk here a little card that says, beat the resistance. So every day I come into my office here and go to work against the resistance.
I love it. Well, that is so perfectly aligned with the struggle so many of our seller experts, if you will, struggle with business development, because it's full of self-doubt. Should I reach out to the person I barely know? Should I ask for help? And you also hardly get any feedback. You could send the perfectly crafted email and the person doesn't reply and you feel like you did something wrong. And so I love that. What did you say? Beat the resistance? Is that sort of what you look at?
Right. Because that's what Steven Pressfield talks about in The War of Art is there's this force out there called the resistance that is trying to get you to stop doing stuff. That's trying to get you to say, hey, you don't need to write today. You can go watch ESPN highlights. Hey, you don't need to read that 47-page research paper today. You can instead play online golf. It's cool. And so every day that resistance is out there tempting you, and which means that every day you go to work to beat the resistance.
I love it. I want to coin the term beat the business development resistance because
Yeah.
it is there and it is heavy.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, let's drop into the 3 pieces of content we've talked about. I think this is so interesting because our folks who are the seller expert world, the audience, where they've got 1 foot in delivery, they've got 1 foot in growth, whether they're a lawyer, accountant, a consultant, or maybe an account manager at a big service-based company. When you're in this hybrid, I'll use the bad S word here, where you do this hybrid sales role, it can be so easy to fall back to the delivery work, to let the resistance, the BD resistance beat you, if you will. So I was so happy when I saw your work, when I first saw the To Sell is Human title. To Sell is Human, because you didn't shy away from the word sell. So I would love to hear from your personal take in writing the book and all the talks, everything else you've done since then. What do you think seller experts should think about when they think about themselves as salespeople?
Well, I think it's a few things, Mo. The first is, as you hinted, well, when you look, all of us are in sales in some sense, whether we like it or not. And I think that's becoming more true. Yeah, every single profession, every single white collar profession has an element of sales in it, whether it is selling a product or service, but also we spend a huge portion of our time persuading, convincing, cajoling other people, if we're bosses, if we're coaches, whatever. So it's built into what we do. The second thing is that based on some changes in the world and also based on what a lot of research tells us, the way to do it effectively is almost the antithesis of what I don't think that your seller experts think this, but a lot of people out there in the world think is how one has to sell, by being duplicitous, by being sneaky, by being underhanded, by not being transparent, by being a little slimy. And that is now more fundamentally wrong than it's ever been because of some big changes in information, in how people have access to information. I mean, in any dimension, what you had is you've gone from a world of information asymmetry where sellers of anything, a product, a service, an experience, an idea, had more information than the buyer. That reigned in our world of commerce for as long as we basically had a world of commerce. And then 8 or 10 years ago, it all changed. And now we are in a world of information parity. Buyers and sellers have roughly the same amount of information in many cases. And we see that a lot of time in B2C. I think it's inherent in B2C. I think it's becoming more and more true in B2B. And in B2B, what's happening is, at the very least, is that buyers are coming into the sales process far later in the game because they're accumulating their own information before they even are willing to talk to someone in sales. So that's a big change. The other thing is your word seller expert is perfect. It's perfect because there is a premium on expertise. And when I look at B2B sales in particular, B2B sales, in my view, is essentially management consulting. Because the way to do B2B sales is to go to a company, go to a firm. It doesn't have to be a private company, but an organization, a nonprofit, a government agency, whatever. Try to understand their situation, their problems, better even than the people running it, and come up with a solution, often a solution that they never imagined for a problem they didn't realize that they had. That is management consulting. And so the world of sales has become especially B2B sales has become much more intellectually sophisticated, drawing on a whole array of very different skills. I mean, a long time, for a certain period, you could probably do pretty well in sales in certain realms, not all, like this sort of a mythology, but you could do certain if you had a good handshake and a good golf game. But that's not true now. That's nonsense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love how you frame that up because our audience and all of us should feel great about selling because it's about being helpful. It's about finding a future that the other person haven't figured out yet. That managing consultant metaphor is perfect. So, yeah.
No, again, I'm just your hallelujah chorus, Mo. What you reminded me of a little bit is this idea that we had in some of the leadership literature, starting with Robert Greenleaf in the late 1960s, early 1970s, where he had this notion of servant leadership, where the role of a leader it sort of inverted the pyramids, that the role of a leader wasn't to command from the top, but the leader was actually at the bottom. And the leader's job was to be a servant to the people above her. And it's a little bit touchy-feely, a little bit spiritually new age, but it actually ends up reflecting what the very best leaders do. And I think there's an analogy in the world of selling. The very best sellers are servant sellers. They serve first and sell next. In the same way that serving others gives you legitimacy to lead, serving others gives you legitimacy to sell and help solve their problems.
I love it. I love that servant seller. And it adds a little alliteration in there. When you said it, 3 words popped in my head, and maybe we can coin this together: helpful, intentional, and proactive. So people can be hip if they're servant sellers.
Sure. I think that's exactly right.
It's a little dad humor. If nothing else, I've got 2 daughters that hopefully laugh at my stuff. All right,
I have 2 daughters also, and they don't laugh at anything I say.
I went through a period where they did, and now I feel like I'm coming back around. There was about a decade where I wasn't funny at all, but every once in a while, I see a glimmer of hope in my future as a stand-up dad comedian. All right, let's get into our second piece second piece of content, because it just flows right down from that. We hear all the time that people have, if we can get them over the hurdle of like that selling is okay and all the definitions that you and I just went back and forth on. The next hurdle I hear often is that people feel like you're bored with it or not. You need to have the gift of gab, or you need to be extroverted, or sometimes people say it like as in a not. Like, well, I don't like going to dinners at night because I want to be with my family, or I don't like going to big conferences, or I don't like to put myself out there. So it comes out in either I'm an introvert or I don't like these things. What's your personal opinion on that sort of age-old advice that you've got to be extroverted to be good at selling?
I don't really have an opinion on it because I have research that gives us the answer to that question.
I love this.
There's some wonderful research done at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll explain it in 30 seconds because I think it's instructive. That we don't have to go with our intuitions on these things. So we can actually look at evidence to make these kinds of. So we have this hypothesis: extroverts are better sellers than introverts. People have tested that hypothesis in rigorous settings, and here's what they found out. So the one great study is done by Adam Grant at Penn, maybe 6 years ago. He went to a large software company, enterprise software, B2B sales in California. They have a very large sales force. He measured the introversion and extroversion levels in the people in the sales force. Then they went out and sold software for a period of time. I don't remember, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, something like that. Then looked at how much they sold. So you can see how much did the introverts sell, how much did the extroverts sell. And it turned out that the extroverts sold a little bit more than the introverts. Not a lot, but just a little bit more. But that wasn't the big study. That wasn't the big takeaway. The real finding of the study is that the ambiverts did better than the introverts. The ambiverts did better than the extroverts. What's an ambivert? An ambivert is someone who is somewhat introverted and somewhat extroverted. When we think about introversion, extroversion, it's not binary. It's not black and white. It's a spectrum. It's always Myers-Briggs has completely ruined our understanding of introversion and extroversion. Like, I'm an I, I'm an E. What it is, it's a spectrum. And basically what it showed is that the people who were extremely introverted, people who would, to your example, never go to a dinner, would avoid it, call in sick and avoid it under all circumstances. Super strong introverts, don't ever want to be with other people. They were terrible at sales. I don't think that's a big surprise. But it turned out that the super extroverted people, the backslapping, glad-handing types, they were also terrible because they talked too much, listened too little, they were too aggressive. My interpretation of some of the research is that they were actually too concerned about being liked rather than actually solving problems or telling the prospect, hey, that might not work. And the people who did the best were the people in the middle. A little bit introverted, a little bit extroverted. We know from the prefix what this means. Ambivert, right? What is it? Where do we hear this? Ambidextrous, right? You can go left, you can go right. And so the people who were the most effective at sales were these ambiverts because they were more versatile. And so the idea that strong extroverts make better salespeople is not true. It is just fundamentally false. The research doesn't show that. The research shows there's other work that shows that the adjacent trait of gregariousness is actually inversely correlated with sales success. Because people who are like hyper gregarious actually are focused on the gregariousness rather than on the elements of being successful in the sales profession. The people who are best are the people in the middle. They're ambiverted. But here's the best news of all, which I think circles back to your really key point, Mo, which is this. If you look at the distribution of introversion and extroversion in the population, it looks like it's a bell curve. Some of us are extremely introverted. Some of us are extremely extroverted, but not that many. Most of us are kind of in the middle. And so what the research tells us that therefore most of us are actually have the native personality to be reasonably good at this function called sales. And so there, when we think about sales, there's so much sort of mythology, so many misplaced assumptions. That's one of them. Strong extroverts are not the best sellers. Not like strong introverts are better though. Strong introverts stink even more. But the people who are the best by far are people who are ambiverts. The good news is that most of us are ambiverts. My guess is that you are an ambivert. When I test, if you put me into a binary situation, I test more introverted than extroverted, but I don't test way on the side of super strong introvert. Not at all. I test more introverted than extroverted, but if the curve is like this, I'm a little bit that way on the middle, which is like many other people.
Yeah, I'm just like you, but I'm one click on the extrovert side. Whenever I test it, if it's a 9-point spectrum, because you can't be in the middle, I'm 1/2 on that side.
Exactly. And that is, and actually that is what you're talking about. You are the quintessential American. That is basically what the American distribution looks like. The distribution of introversion and extroversion varies a little bit by culture, not surprisingly. So you look at the East Asian more Confucian cultures, and it'll be a bell curve. The middle part of the bell curve will be skewed a little bit more toward the introvert side, whereas in America, a little bit more toward the extrovert side. But even then, there aren't massive differences.
Well, and this should give people hope, because if content area 1 we talked about is selling is about helpfulness, it's about that. I loved your word servant seller, the metaphor, the management consultant. Somebody that's in this middle of this curve, they're ambivert. They like being with the client a little bit. They like going back and thinking about how they could serve them better, coming back with a proposal or an idea that they hadn't thought of. This is beautiful because that fits the whole metaphor of the management consultant and being helpful.
Right. And what's more is that it doesn't force people to mistakenly self-select out of it. So they say, oh, you know what, that seems kind of interesting. And it could be a pretty interesting job, but I'm not super strong extrovert, so I might not be good at it. Like, I don't want people to self-select out of a sales role for that reason.
Yes. I love that. All right. Well, let's transition to our third big meaty piece of content because it flows right from that. So where we're at today, we sort of summarized that. So the next piece I want to dig down into the research that you did on the book When. Love the book, promoted it to our audience, and I learned a lot from it, and I reorganized my days to the extent I can, traveling around, working with clients, but to the extent I can, I completely reorganized things in a way that before I read When was invisible to me. So when you think about business development habits, when you think about how folks in these hybrid roles of part service, part sales, and how they should structure their day, what's the big, huge takeaway or advice you would give folks that are trying to structure their business development routine?
So the big idea, I'll give you the big idea and then I'll give you the takeaway. The big idea, which is important on a day-to-day level, is this, that our cognitive abilities, our brain power does not remain constant over the course of the day. It changes. It changes in material ways. And you can't think of a certain time of day being equal with another time of day. It's typically not inherently. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is that we tend to move, it's complicated, but we tend to move through the day in 3 stages: peak, a trough, a recovery. Peak, a trough, a recovery. Most of us move through in that order. About 80% of us move through in that order. People who have what's called an evening chronotype, that is, they're night owls. They naturally wake up late and go to sleep late. They're more complicated. But 80% of us move through the day, peak, trough, recovery. Peak early in the day, trough in the middle of the day, recovery around the time we're talking now, like late afternoon, early evening. Here's what we know. During the peak, which for most of us is the morning, for night owls, it's late in the day. That's when we're most vigilant. What does it mean to be vigilant? Means you're able to bat away distractions. So that makes the peak the best time for what's called analytic work. Heads down, focused work, going over numbers, formulating strategies, writing a report. During the trough, which is the early afternoon, terrible time of day. What we should be doing there, we all know it. I'm sleepy. I need a coffee. Shit, we won't go into all the evidence, but massive evidence of enormous and widespread decrements in performance across basically every domain, especially in medicine. You see it in jury decision making. You see it in certain kinds of corporate performance. You see it in the performance of students in school. Big drop up there. And then finally, there's a recovery period later in the day, around now, basically, where your mood is back up, but your vigilance is down. That makes it a good time for what psychologists call insight work. Insight work is work that requires solving non-obvious problems, brainstorming, iterative kinds of things. And so that's what we should do. Analytic work during the peak, which for most of us is the morning. For night owls, it's much, much later in the day. Administrative work, routine, filling out your expense reports, answering routine email, early to mid-afternoon and beyond, do your insight work. And as a general set of design principles, that's what the science tells us we should be doing.
Well, that's cool because somebody that's a hybrid role, they've got one foot in doing all those things like admin work, staying on top of the team, project management, and they've got part of their foot in trying to reach out and meet that person they haven't met yet, which is tremendously stressful for a lot of seller experts. They could match up their various activities in the day and create habits, business development habits and routines to work through it in a way that's optimal for their brain.
Exactly. And the design, again, there's a lot of individual variation, Mo. People behave differently. Each of us is different. So I can't say to you, hey, you need to get up at 6:14 a.m. and get to work at 7:37 and work. And it does. And also the research doesn't say, the biology doesn't say everybody should be getting up at 4:30 in the morning and winning the day. A lot of us can't get up at 4:30 in the morning. It doesn't work for our bodies or brains. So there's some individual variation, but we know these general rules. And there's some, again, you talked earlier about some small things we can do. So one of the things that I do, I'm a very typical chronotype. I'm not an extreme lark, but I'm larky. So I do my writing in the morning and I don't answer my email in the morning. Instead, I do my writing. And so, because that's the work that requires the most vigilance. Then in the middle of the day, I just finished up a whole round of the crap, answering routine emails and things like that. And then toward the late afternoon, as we're doing now, things that require a little bit more kind of freewheeling mental looseness. Everything that I've learned over my own working life in 20 years of studying other people's working lives is a change. I used to believe in big, hairy, audacious goals, and they have their place. But now I'm a convert to small wins that pile up into that lead to another small win, that leads to another small win, that eventually cascade into something bigger. And so I think a lot of times we get paralyzed. We say, can I change everything? Can I do everything? And the answer is no, you can't. You can't change everything. You can't do everything. That's life. But I think it's the wrong question. I think the real question we should be asking ourselves, Mo, and maybe here's the takeaway, is what is one small thing I can do today to make things a little bit better? And I think all of us have the answer to that question. Most of us know that answer intuitively, and we just have to start doing it. So starting is important. Starting small, getting small wins, that's the secret.
Business development is the answer to growing your career from your current level of success and then to the next level. But to get there, you'll need a new skill. Watch this video next to discover what it takes to keep moving forward. Thanks for listening, and talk more soon.